Alright. So now that we have our definitions of logic and arguments taken care of, we can talk about different properties that logic and systems of logic and arguments have. To begin with, we'll talk about deductiveness. So systems of logic can be deductive, or they can be inductive, or they can be neither. Now, what does it mean to be deductive? A system of logic that is deductive does not allow arguments with true premises to support a false conclusion. This is called that the system of logic has rules which are fully truth-preserving. Now, what this means in practical terms is that if we have a argument that has a premise 1, premise 2, and a conclusion, that if premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, then for the argument to be deductive, the conclusion must be true according to the rules. Now, if instead this argument, if the system of logic we're using allows the conclusion to be false, then it is not deductive. It may be inductive, or it could not be a system of logic we want to be using at all. It could be something with rules that don't really make sense. But the point is that if we're using a deductive system of logic, if it has true conclusions, the rules of the system must make it sure that you have a true conclusion. Now, a similar, very related topic is that of validity. Now, validity applies to arguments, not to systems of logic. And validity can only be applied to deductive arguments. Now, that means that the arguments must be placed within a deductive system of logic. And when we say that an argument is valid, we're saying that an argument cannot have true premises and a false conclusion. And the picture is very similar to the one we just saw, that an argument with two premises and a conclusion, if both the premises are true and the conclusion is true, then we have a valid argument. If, however, the conclusion is false, then we have an invalid argument. Now, this is a description of an argument. It doesn't say anything about whether the system of logic we're using is a good one or a bad one, is it deductive or inductive. All it is saying is it's characterizing whether our argument has certain properties, whether or not it allows us to go from true premises to a false conclusion or not. Now, just to clarify things, we want to make sure that we understand that deductive only applies to systems of logic and validity only applies to arguments. And we can draw a little picture. We have deductive, we have not deductive, and we have valid, and we have not valid. Now, if an argument is within a deductive system of logic and it's valid, then we're happy. We're like, yay, it's a good argument. If it's in a deductive system of logic but it's not valid, we're like, okay, it's still good, it's still an argument, but it just doesn't work the way it should. So we're kind of sad. Now, however, if we're dealing with a system of logic that is not deductive, then it doesn't really make any sense to say that it's valid or not valid. These terms only apply to arguments within a deductive system of logic. So we kind of ignore this side. If it's not deductive, we don't even go to validity. But if it's deductive, we can determine whether arguments are valid or not. And now we'll come to the final term we want to discuss, which is a sound or an unsound argument. A sound argument is an argument that is valid and it has true premises, which also means it has a true conclusion. And so our picture is like we got an argument sitting over here, two premises and a conclusion, and someone comes along and says, hey, this is a sound argument. We're like, alright, everything is true. However, if it's another picture, and someone says, this argument is not sound, we're not really sure what's going on. We can say, well, something in here is false, or something in here is false, or there's not a connection between the two. Something is going on, but we can't really say for sure which one of these things is the false one and which one's the true one. And just to clarify one more, we'll make one more picture. We'll have a sound and a not sound. We'll have a valid, we'll have a not valid. I'll draw a little box. Not a very good box. So we say, if you have a valid argument and it's sound, that means everything is true. If you have a valid argument and it's not sound, we're not exactly sure, but we know something in here is false. There's something going on that's not true. Now, if we don't have a valid argument, then it doesn't really make sense to say that something is sound. That's just wrong, because the requirement is that a sound argument is valid. So if it's not valid, we don't call it sound. And if it's not valid, then you would say it's not sound, but that doesn't really apply, because sound or not sound only applies to valid arguments only. So that's really not really a good thing to go there. So we don't like these boxes. Only care about boxes that are valid, and then we can decide whether it's a sound argument or not a sound argument. And that's it.